There is now new evidence that points to a potential cause for the Air India 171 flight that crashed first 787 Dreamliner 8, whole loss ever of that Dreamliner series. And folks, we've got to talk about what nobody is piecing together yet. And I think, as a jet pilot myself, I may be piecing together some of the puzzle that hasn't been mentioned by other creators in the space. First of all, shout out to some of the other channels covering the topics, whether it's AI Telly's animations, which are always great, or CaptainSteeeve, who finally U-turned on blaming the pilots to now arguing dual engine failure is possible. Originally, we talk about the potential for the first officer to grab the flap setting instead of the gear, and we make these sort of speculative assertions when we actually see components of the aircraft on the ground indicating the flaps may have actually been set in the perfect configuration for takeoff. Now, obviously, we know that the ram air turbine has been deployed. We know that the landing gear stays out. So what could potentially put together all of the pieces of the puzzle that nobody is talking about? As a jet pilot, we're going to get into it right away. Vapor lock. This is my opinion, and I'm going to explain to you why I think vapor lock could have caused a dual engine failure inside this aircraft and led to the crash and death of now potentially over 270 individuals. First of all, what is vapor lock and how can it occur? Generally, you're going to see vapor lock occur when the conditions inside the aircraft are extremely hot. What we know about the Air India crash already is that people were fanning themselves inside of the aircraft because the air conditioning was off. You could see people fanning themselves. This aircraft sat on the tarmac, per The Guardian, for over 2 hours. By sitting on the tarmac for over 2 hours, potentially as long as 3 hours before takeoff, we end up with a condition where this aircraft is in a very hot configuration or hot state. The air conditioning is not on inside of the aircraft, and you end up getting fuel lines inside of the aircraft that potentially become heat saturated. Now, why does that matter? Why would it matter that fuel lines inside of the aircraft are potentially heat saturated? It's not a problem if your fuel pumps are functioning. Vapor lock is basically the lowering of the increase in temperature leading to vapor bubbles inside of the fuel lines of an aircraft. This could happen in a car, it could happen in a Cessna, it could happen in a Piper, and it could happen in a lower or a larger aircraft like a Boeing 787 as well. Now, usually a 787 is not going to see this happen because we have two very powerful hydraulic fuel pumps that keep positive pressure on our fuel lines, so that way our engines don't run into some kind of dual engine failure after a takeoff. Which, mind you, when we see this aircraft take off, which we now have higher definition footage of the aircraft takeoff. Initially, we had pretty grainy footage. We now have higher definition footage of not only the takeoff, but also the crash. We don't see what is characteristic of an engine flameout, suggesting that the aircraft hit birds. We don't see birds. We don't see any kind of destruction to the engines. Instead, it looks like the aircraft simply lost lift. And there are reports now, although we don't have the air traffic control data yet, there are reports that before impact, the pilots issued a mayday call and stated no power, no thrust. So what could potentially, or how could vapor lock potentially contribute to this? Well, in my opinion, and this is how we piece together the facts, I'll give you my opinions right after the facts. We know that this aircraft took off at 13:38. That's in the afternoon. It's 1:38 p.m. The temperature at the time of takeoff was between 102 and 104 degrees. The air condition was not operating inside the aircraft at the time the aircraft was sitting on the tarmac, which means you have an aircraft that's heating up. It means you have fuel lines that are heating up. It means you have an aircraft that's in a very warm configuration for takeoff. And potentially upon takeoff, we notice that the landing gear is still down on the aircraft. Is it potentially possible that at the time of takeoff, we had a dual hydraulic failure which led to the inability to raise the gear, which then turned into a loss of positive fuel pressure to both the number 1 and the number 2 engine. With that loss of positive pressure, at the same time as a tilt up of the aircraft, we would have less suction, sort of gravity suction, if you will, from the more gravity-fed pumps inside, well, the non, they're not really pumps, the sort of gravity-fed fuel lines inside of the aircraft. You would have had less positive pressure from gravity because the plane is tilted up, at the same time as the potential that you could lead air bubbles in fuel lines to move through the fuel system thanks to the nose-up attitude of the aircraft during takeoff, leading to a simultaneous dual engine failure. Now, to me, this pieces together a lot of the puzzle. We know it was a very hot day. We know the aircraft was sitting on the ground without air conditioning, leading to the likelihood that inside the aircraft, all components of the aircraft were heat soaked, absolutely heat locked in a condition where it's highly likely we would have had vapor in the fuel lines. That would not ordinarily be an issue though. It would not ordinarily be an issue to take off in a hot configuration because you have hydraulic power powering fuel pumps to where you don't actually need to worry about vapor lock. You don't need sensors to worry about vapor lock because you have hydraulic pumps and fuel pumps that are operating the other systems of your aircraft. However, if upon takeoff you suddenly have a dual hydraulic failure that shuts down the number 1 and number 2 fuel pumps, at the same time as being unable to remove the drag of your landing gear, which is also a potential symptom that the landing gear hydraulics weren't functioning, since we need hydraulics to be able to operate the landing gear, then we could be in a place where upon takeoff we had a dual hydraulic failure, which led to the failure to lift off our landing gear, which led to the simultaneous then lack of positive fuel pressure to the engines. Now we feed from sump pumps or gravity pumps, basically, just sort of the natural flow of fuel inside of the aircraft without positive pressure, which amplifies the impact of vapor inside fuel lines, leading potentially to the bang sound that reportedly were heard. Not only did the survivor of this incident, which is absolutely remarkable that somebody survived this incident, report a loud bang, but others are reporting that this loud bang was heard on the ground. Some people attribute this bang to the deployment of the Ram air turbine. I've never seen the deployment of the Ram air turbine lead to a loud bang, but a compressor stall or some form of compressor surge, potentially because of dual vapor lock shutting off both engines, could cause this. So think about the sequence of events, how this could happen here. The plane's on the ground for 2 to 3 hours in 102 to 104 degree temperatures. The plane has no air conditioning or cooling occurring on the ground inside of the aircraft, leading to potential heat soaking of all of the systems, including the fuel lines in the aircraft. Upon takeoff, we have a simultaneous hydraulic failure, leading to the failure to be able to lift the gear, because by now we should see the sequence of the gear going up begin to activate. I'll show you that in just a moment. Then what we end up with is a vapor lock situation thanks to the nose high attitude during takeoff, which allows vapor to move up. Think about it, if you turn a water bottle, the water goes up to the top, leading to less fuel pressure for those engines, a dual engine failure thanks to a failure of the hydraulic pumps and vapor lock. Now we have the drag of the gear. We do not have enough altitude to escape the situation. We have flaps deployed based on the debris on the floor at the proper setting, so we're not concerned about a flap issue here. We get the deployment of the Ram air turbine because of this not only hydraulic failure, but also engine failure. And we're way too low for the Ram air turbine to restart these engines because these engines are going to take way too long to start. And so here could be a case of hydraulic pump failure leading to vapor lock and a failure that is not a pilot's fault. Instead, it could be a ground management concern where originally, you know, when we get these sort of videos, a lot of people were sending me videos of the failure of the air condition to be on the ground, but usually those systems are independent, right? In fact, a lot of pilots, when we take off, they turn the air conditioning off for takeoff because they want all the power for those engines so we can gain as much altitude as possible, as quickly as possible. But the fact that people are fanning themselves potentially for hours on the ground really could lead to that heat-soaked condition in an aircraft. Now, something to know about Air India flights is there have been cases before in other flights where you see this sort of condensing or water dripping down inside of the aircraft because the air conditioning systems can't handle the heat in India. And so this is a potential air conditioning-led maintenance issue, which leads to an overheated condition inside of the aircraft, leading to some kind of fuel fault inside of the aircraft. Now, there is speculation as well, and there are rumors as well that have been posted, and it's hard to give credence to some of these because we just don't know. But there are screenshots of people leaving comments saying that they have flown this aircraft. We can't obviously verify that from a comment. And this comment that I saw, I don't want to show it up on screen because I don't want to point out this person's username or whatever. But there are comments, there are screenshots of a YouTube comment circulating where somebody says they have piloted this aircraft and they've had single engine failures on this aircraft before, and that Air India doesn't provide the proper maintenance for these systems, whether it's hydraulic or otherwise. Now, we don't know if that's true. It could be a failure of Boeing. It could be a failure of, unfortunately, the Swiss cheese model lining up, where unfortunately you had a hydraulic failure combined with severe heat in India, a lack of cooling, ground delays, and everything lining up to lead to a vapor lock condition, where Boeing's, generally you don't have vapor lock sensors because you have hydraulic pumps that are working. So it's not an issue that you have to worry about. Now, nobody that I've seen has mentioned this so far, and this is why I think this is very interesting. CaptainSteeeve, at the end of his "Wow, the ram air turbine changes everything" video, appropriately says this looks like it was a dual engine failure. And I agree, I think this was a dual engine failure. But I think it was a dual engine failure caused in part by the failure of the hydraulic pumps and a heat-soaked plane, which finally combines with what we see with that interior footage of the aircraft. Now, I want to show you a real takeoff here in a jet, and I want you to see the normal sequence here on takeoff. There are still some people arguing that it is possible that they just forgot to lift the gear. I find this highly, highly unlikely. As somebody who's gone through extensive training, and I still learn every day in these aircraft, people don't forget to raise the gear. And it's really hard to mess up the gear and the flaps in an aircraft, in a jet. In this case, our gear handle is up here. It happens, but it's relatively unlikely. And then our flap settings are over here. And again, we saw flaps deployed on the ground. But what I want you to see is how quick we take this gear up. And so you'll see that on this takeoff. This is a takeoff out of Heber, Utah. This is a very high elevation airport. So while it's not hot, it's high elevation, so high density altitude, less lift, much like what you also get in a high heat situation, like what happened likely in this Air India situation, since the temperatures were 102 to 104 out there. But I want you to see how quickly we go for this gear retraction, just so you can see it from a different angle. And we're gonna leave the flaps in until about 1,000 feet above the field here, to maintain as much lift as we can for as long as possible, especially since we're in a mountainous terrain. We're basically in this bowl here, and I manually right turned this to do a visual climb over the airport to get out to the south. This is a non-towered airport, so here's the takeoff.
Happy Sunday.
Oh. 2 on the pavement, heading degrees.
Here
we go.
I have no traffic here, so
Yeah, you're clear.
let's do it. Okay, we did our takeoff okay, lights are good,
Yep.
everything's good.
Takeoff checks complete. Here we go.
Alright, ready?
Yeah, I'd probably do a little static too.
Oh yeah, for sure. Here we go. Takeoff power set.
Alright, 8 yards in the green.
Okay, brakes off.
Alright.
Airspeed's live.
Check 3 ways.
6,000 to go. 70.
Check.
D1.
D1, rotate. D2.
You're up.
That's all right.
There's the gear.
As we get to 400, we'll
There
do
you go.
flaps.
Yep.
I guess we're at
Climb
400 over on this one.
All right, I'm going to call 400 over.
Flaps up.
Flaps up. Gear up, flap up.
I misremembered. We said 400 over. Obviously, we had previously established that in this case. But what's interesting is you can see how quickly we go for that gear up, flap up. Mostly that gear up, very first thing. Then we wait purposefully for flaps later. And we've got 2 pilots here, so we're able to verify, like, hey, then we even do our checklist afterwards. Gear up, flap up, right? This is, this is a ascent out of Heber. Another way you could see, or another thing to know is people have asked, hey, what about the ram air turbine? You know, you've got this ram air turbine. Can't you restart the engine in this case? If you've got the ram air turbine moving, you know, isn't there a way you can restart? Problems. Even if you're able to clear the vapor lock condition and the ram air turbine is trying to help you get your hydraulic power back, engines take quite a while to start on the ground. I would say when we, especially if it's hot, on a hot day, it's actually surprisingly slow to start these engines. On a hot day, so like a Vegas day, if we go to start these engines, I might say, okay, engine start, we clear right, whatever. We go for an engine start. It'll probably take about 45 seconds to a minute before this is actually at speeds, this jet engine. Unfortunately, the Air India flight was only in the air for somewhere around 45 seconds, maybe 30 seconds of flight. I took off at 13:38, so 1:38 p.m., and then crashed at 1:38 p.m. So anyway, this gives us a little bit of a potential here on the Air India flight. It does look like, again, flaps were appropriately set. It does look like, although we'll have to verify once we get more data. This is just from crash footage that we can tell, so obviously there's speculation involved here. And we have to be careful about how we're putting pieces of the puzzle together. But to me, when we put the pieces of the puzzle together, the loud bang that we heard was likely, to me, the stall of the engines, right? So this is the stall / the engine fail that you hear, whether it's a compressor surge and then the, essentially the flame, well, you don't get a flame out here, but the shutdown of the engines. You've got hot, which increases the conditions for vapor lock. We've got time on tarmac. We've got 2 to 3 hours on the tarmac. We've got the gear staying up, which suggests a hydraulic failure. Vapor lock also can occur and be most devastating on a hydraulic failure. The loss of lift supports the idea of an engine failure. And we don't believe that birds or the flaps were necessarily an issue here. I also believe that even if the flaps were retracted slightly early, with both of the engines still on, this aircraft should have been able to climb out of this condition. So that's my opinion on the Air India 171 crash. I'm surprised we haven't heard vapor lock mentioned from anyone else, but I'd be curious to see what other people's perspectives are on this. I'm going to look at some comments here. Somebody here writes, what is the rat? Yes, but the black box has been recovered. The rat is the ram air turbine. It's a little propeller that aids in providing hydraulic pressure to hydraulic systems that have failed, or give you an opportunity to restart the engines of the aircraft. The ram air turbine also has a very distinct sound when it's deployed, and is very consistent with the audio that we hear of the Air India accident. So, for example, if we jump over to Blancolirio has a fantastic comparison of what the ram air turbine sounds like, and I'll go ahead and play a clip from his video.
It's Friday the 13th of June. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blancolirio
You'll see this right here. Listen for the sound of the propeller. That's it. You could see that ram air turbine. I'll pause. Right here. Some people are associating the bang with the deployment of the ram air turbine. I don't think so. I think that was the sound of the engines failing. And then listen to
Sound
the
of
Air
rat
India audio.
Propellers on our Husky. Did you hear that very distinctive sound of the rat? It sounds like one of the
Here's the audio from the crash.
into this.
So there you go. Some of my thoughts on what happened with the Air India accident. Thanks for watching the segment on the Air India accident. Hopefully, whatever lessons are learned from this accident can prevent future accidents.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.